Good afternoon, everyone here in the room, as well as those who are following online. It's really my huge pleasure to welcome you all here today on a session on green radiology and sustainability. My name is Professor Andrea Rockall. I work at Imperial College in London. And sustainability is one of my passions at home and at work. And so I'm really, really pleased that today we have a really fantastic panel of speakers. I'm so delighted that they were able to join us. We're going to start, first of all, with really somebody from what I call the North Star of what I'm trying to do in my department. I look to this department in Basel. Tobias Hay is going to talk to us about switching off and the approach that they've taken there in Basel and the huge advantage that we can have in that process. Next, we're going to hear from Professor Olivier Clément. He is a professor of radiology in Paris, and he's also the Contrast Media Safety Committee lead. And he's going to be talking about what we can do about contrast media recycling. After this, we're going to have a talk about waste management, which is an area that we can really impact in our daily lives. And Mark Bergmans, the head of IR from Leiden University Medical Center, will be taking us through that. And then we'll follow up with sustainability and AI, problem or solution. Daniel Truhen will be taking us through that. He's a doctor and a professor of radiology in Aachen. And followed by that, we'll have a panel discussion. Don't forget, there is an online Slido. Please pose your questions. And of course, in the room, we'll have a microphone. If I can ask everybody to turn your mobile phones to silent mode, please. And again, just to remember that you can do your feedback later to get your CME. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to ask Tobias Hay to come to the podium and kick us off with switching off. Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you for the introduction. I have nothing to disclose. Now, in the next minutes, maybe we can all see how we throw out money out of the window. But the problem is, it's not only money that goes out the window, it's also CO2. And you probably all heard this comparison. If you take the global healthcare system and would rank it as a country, we would come in as number 5. And that poses an immediate problem. Our core principle is do no harm. And with those emissions, we harm people directly, indirectly across the world. So if you look at my hospital, and we look at which units have the highest energy demand, it's radiology and nuclear medicine, followed by other specialties which have intensive modality usage. So if you're in a hurry and you need to go, here's my executive summary, how to lower energy consumption. We need to identify non-productive consumption and then turn it off. Or in other words, measure and monitor energy waste. So we are a big part of the problem. Let's first define some scanner activity states. So if you turn on a scanner, it's system on, so you can scan immediately. And within the system on, you have net scan, which is actually the phase where you produce images, where you acquire images. That's the productive phase. Then you could be a bit more generous and say patient room time, it's the active phase, where you probably could still do something with the patient or the scanner, but outside the active phase, there's idle phase, and you're not productive outside this. And then, of course, you turn off your systems and you cannot scan anymore, but most systems still consume energy while being turned off. So here I have a year of CT operation and all those activity states I just mentioned across time and energy. You can see how they distribute, and you can see that net energy or net scan is quite low in terms of the time a scanner spends over a year. But the problem is the idle time. 2/3 of its on time a scanner spends in idle. The reason being is that a CT scan is really fast, so you're done within seconds. And that's the problem there. Now, if you take a house, which is our comparison for modalities, the energy usage of a house, a scanner that you still turn off during off hours consumes as much as 5 4-people households. Now let's look at two ways of operating a scanner. On top, I show you a scanner that you operate 24/7, leave it always on. And below you have a scanner that you only operate during daytime and shut down during off hours. Let's disregard the scanning events and just see how much you can save. So the green area is what you can save. You just turn it off and it's not in use. And in theory, that would be 70% reduction just by turning it off. The problem again is here that if you turn off a system, it's not zero consumption. And depending how much system off consumption there is, you actually get a reduction between 20 to 70%. But this continuously running baseline consumption, if a system is turned on, is actually the problem that causes so much energy consumption. You can also look at different modalities in comparison. I will look at the idle time of those scanners. This is indicated here in blue. And if you look at MRI, MRI is quite intense. You always scan and there's less time in between when you change the patients, and so there's less idle time. The CT we talked about, there's quite a lot of idle time. And for angio, it's a bit worse because you have less procedures and you have less scanning, so to say, in between. So you have a lot of idle time. And we measured this, and it might come out soon as a paper. And more than 4/5 of the energy of an angio unit is non-productive. For MRI, it's 1/3 of the energy that goes to the system off because it needs a lot of cooling. So basically, for most of our modalities, it's that they're built in a way that they, when they're on, they can immediately scan and operate at full speed. So whenever you don't scan, you have high idle energy consumption. And what we need to do is we need to tighten the schedule, shut down whenever possible, and we need to have solutions that help us to tackle idle time and lower energy consumption in system off. But there's more. Let's look at all the other devices that we have. Ultrasound is actually quite good because it does have a standby mode, not like the other modalities. CT we talked about, an angio unit around 10 houses, a PET CT is 10 houses, and an MRI comes around 26 houses. So these are scanners that you turn off during off hours. If you would have a 24/7 on system, these numbers would be much higher. And here I give you all the numbers that you have for on idle consumption and off consumption. As you can see, if you leave those devices on, these numbers are quite high. So if we take again my hospital and we take the larger modalities, we would add up to 241 houses and almost 1,000 people living in them. So we started to do or try to rate our modalities in terms of energy efficiency. And as I said, ultrasound is not too bad. CT is actually bad. It comes in at G. So for the next modality, we have to extend the scale and invent a T for angio. And for PET CT and MRI, we need to go to Z. And for PET MRI, there's no space left. We probably need to go to double letters. But do you know how much 1 kilowatt hour actually is? Let's meet Robert. He's very good at cycling. And he will compete against this 700-watt toaster. And he manages to cycle for like around a minute. And after that minute, he's really exhausted. But the toaster is toasted. You know how much energy he produced? 0.021 kilowatt hours. So from a human perspective, 1 kilowatt hour is quite a lot. There are also some myths that some people tell us about shutting down systems. You hear that if you turn them off regularly, they might break, which is not true. The vendors actually advocate shutting down the system. And there's no increased energy consumption if you start them up and shut them down, which would then make them more inefficient if you do that more often. And most devices start up really quickly, so there's no need for constant on for emergency. I can show you, these are our angio units, and what you see here is the tracking of our neuro and body interventional units, and the red areas is where we shut them down on the weekends and nights, and green is on. And we have very fast time to groin times for strokes. They start up at 3 to 4 minutes. So no need to keep them on. 1 hour of keeping a neuroangio on at 3 kilograms of CO2 in Middle Europe. Let's look at other devices. We have a lot of PCs, virtual or physical, and printers in the hospital, and they're a bit of no man's land. And here I'm tracking all of our devices in our hospital. And we can see, yes, during daytime, more are on, but you can also see a lot of devices are still on during the night and on weekends, indicated in blue here. So just to do a little bit of a quick calculation, if we just would aim for 10% more devices shutting down during those times, and we have around 1,800 printers, 13,000 PCs and virtual devices, it would be 120,000 kilowatt hours, 15 tons of CO2, and 30,000 euros. And it's just 10%. I think we can do even better. So small stuff really adds up. One big chunk is building systems, building technology. I'm showing you here what the vendors tell us. If you have all those devices, CT, MRI, PET-CT, and angios, what your cooling demand would add up to. At least this is our hospital. We would be around 500 kilowatt cooling demand. Well, we measured this, and it's 160 kilowatt. So it's pretty oversized, and it's very inefficient to operate and actually install those machines as well. What we need and what we're working on with our vendors is that the modality can send a signal to the building system, and then if the system is shut down, you can also reduce the climate system output, and also for the roofs. Because that causes a lot of energy consumption in a hospital, and the cooling system actually assumes that these rooms are always in full operation in the machines. So you can reduce a lot there. And as we said, the cooling system capacity is normally quite oversized, and in these specifications of the vendors for energy and cooling, there's so many safety margins there that there's a lot of room for saving if we do a very hospital-specific approach for the cooling and would create a cooling on demand and not just cool all the time. What about imaging waste? You may have heard about the donut of truth. So a CT imaging where we aim for, well, we do a lot of more imaging, but not always for the benefit of the patient, what's called low-value imaging. And here I'm showing you the last 10 years in our department for chest CT, ruling out pulmonary embolism. And you can see the diagnostic yield for positive findings. We were around 17%, but now we are 10%. So imaging usage goes up, the diagnostic yield goes down. And I think we need kind of metrics like those that we feed back to the physicians, referring physicians, to tell them what they're doing, and then they can decide if that's the way to go. But we need to address overuse of imaging, I think. So, as I said, we are a big part of the problem. The good thing is we can be a big part of the solution. And what we came up with is a monitoring system, so you can track all your devices, either PCs, printers, or modalities. And we looked at our installation and still found some pack stations and a lot of modalities that you can still turn off during the night. And we were able to save quite a lot of energy, money, and CO2. And you can find the software here on GitHub if you're interested. And with that software, you can create dashboards that show all the users what you achieved. And here you can see how we learned to shut down PET-CTs, at least partially, and save a lot of energy, because we found with this monitoring device that PET-CTs were always left on for various reasons. I want to highlight work here done from Moritz Zeiss. What he's actually been doing is quite great. So if you measure your consumption, you need a lot of infrastructure. Now you can do it virtually. What he did, he took our data and trained machine learning algorithm on the log files. You just can upload the log file and you get the prediction of your power consumption with less than 0.6 deviation over a month. You can actually check out this work. It's a poster here on the ESR, ESMRB poster, and you can upload your own log files here if you want. It's great work. I also want to highlight work from Martin. He sits here and he will give his talk later. Just a brief summary. He optimized scheduling on 3 CTs over a year and found that if you do that and optimize for energy reduction, you can go down to 1/3 of daily energy consumption. 10,000 kilowatt hours, 1.4 tons of CO2. This is a theoretical value, but it shows that there's saving potential in optimizing scheduling. So let's take one of each of those modalities and see what they would consume if they would leave them on 24/7 over a year. So 500,000 of kilowatt hours and 125,000 euros as energy costs. Well, if you turn them off only and use them daytime operation, you save 200,000 kilowatt hours and 50,000 euros. Now, if you look at CO2, it really depends where you are. So there's a factor called carbon intensity, which basically tells you how much CO2 you emit per kilowatt hour that you spend. And you can see there's quite a variety across Europe. So if you would take numbers for Austria and Switzerland, we would save 26 tons of CO2. But mind you, depending where you are in Europe, this number can be 3 to 4 times higher, above 100 tons of CO2, just by turning off the systems. And these calculations are actually done without the cooling system. That would add up even more to this calculation. So I may have mentioned it. What can we do? We need to turn off the systems whenever possible and go find systems that you can turn off. It helps a lot. It's quite an easy fix. And we still get messages from somewhere else saying, I cannot turn them off. People tell me otherwise the system would break. It's a thing we can do. It's quite easy. And talk to your vendors. They're quite open. They know about the topic, and there are actually quite a lot of recommendations now. And there's some misunderstandings on both sides. What else can we do? There's a lot we can do on all those levels. We can improve our imaging protocols, can shorten the protocols. Do we need beautiful images or aim for the diagnosis? We talked about examinations, low-value imaging. I think we need to address this. On the scanner side, you can optimize the operation and turn them off. On the building technology side, there's a lot of things we can do to save secondary energy consumption there. Something I found, which is quite interesting, I think, if there's a paper saying that we have so much heat waste in Europe that we would recycle this, and which is supposedly technically possible, you could electrify the entirety of Europe with that, just by recycling the heat waste. And in radiology, with 120,000 CTs and 45,000 MRIs globally, and we know from our vendors that less than 50% of those machines are actually turned off during off hours. If we increase or improve that number, we can save a lot of CO2, a lot of energy, a lot of money. And to end on a more philosophical note, what do you think? With highly developed healthcare systems, are they trending towards becoming more or less efficient? And even if we improve efficiency, we have to be aware of the efficiency trap. Most of the time, if you improve efficiency, you end up doing more of the same stuff, and then you spend this gain of efficiency. So we maybe need to address more effectiveness over efficiency. And with that, thank you very much for your attention, and let's tame our energy-hungry monsters.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And happy to talk about contrast media recycling. Where are we at? Is it possible to save contrast and to be less polluting in the environment? So where is the problem? There is concerning iodinated contrast media, there is an increasing use in the world because we are buying more and more CT machines, and when we buy CT machines, we do examinations, and about 40% of our examination are injected with contrast media. And if you put an average of 100 milliliter per injection, you can calculate that over the 300 million CT scans performed per year in the world, it represents about 12 million of liters of ICM. So it's a lot of contrast media that is going to be injected in the patients and that is going to be recovered in the sewage system, because the patients are going to filter it through the kidney and it's going to the urinary excretion, and so the patient is going to pee all the contrast media in the environment. And there is now many papers showing that there is a circle of pollution, I would say, of environmental pollution with iodinated contrast media, with the patient being injected and then the urine is going to the sewage treatment plant, and then it's going to surface water, then to drinking water, and eventually this drinking water is drunk by the patient, and there is a cycle of environmental contamination with iodine contrast media. This has been found for the drinking water and on the Rhine River, which has been very well watched because it belongs to several countries. You can see on this line that per day in 2020, the average load of contrast media per day was 65 kilogram of iomepryl, 31 iopramide. So you see total, it's a lot. It's a lot of contrast media per day that is going to be found in the water, and not only in the Rhine River, but when you look at the St. Lawrence River in Canada, you can see that there is, concerning gadolinium, we can find a peak of gadolinium in the mussels that are living in the shells that are living in these waters, because they concentrate the rare earth elements inside their bodies, and so we can find some pollutions of the mussels due to this release of gadolinium in the environment. And this is also another study from Sweden, where you can also find a peak of gadolinium inside the bivalve shelves in Sweden. So it means that all over the world we can find iodinated or gadolinium residues in the environment, which are recycled in the drinking water or by the animals, like for example these mussels. So there is an urgent need to decrease the wastes of contrast media all over the world. And for that, we have different leverage levels. First of all, in the factory where the contrast media is produced, there are some wastes. And these wastes should be handled correctly by the contrast media company in order not to put them in the sewage, but to have a recycling process in order to recover these wastes from the factory. Then, in the radiology department, the unused vials or the end of vials after you have injected your patients, it should not be thrown away in the waste. It should be recycled. It could be recycled in order to avoid this contrast media to go back to the sewage system. And the last possibility is the waste from the patient, the urinary excretion of the patient. And for the moment, there is no specific policy for that. There is different possibility we will talk about later. But mainly, we have 3 ways to try to decrease the pollution of iodine and gadolinium in the environment. So first of all, for iodine, what can we do? The first thing to do is to optimize the use of contrast media. We should not inject 120 cc when only 80, 90 cc are needed for an oncologic examination, for example. So it means that we need to carefully check all the appropriate dosing depending on the protocols, on our CT protocols, especially for oncology imaging, where the total iodine load is important. The amount of iodine which should be injected should be always calculated based on the weight of the patient, which is not always done. Sometimes it's a fixed dose for everybody, which is a very bad thing to do. And for vascular imaging, it's not the total iron dose, it's a flux of iodine per second, which is important. So also these protocols for vascular imaging should be also optimized in order to decrease and to optimize the injection of contrast media. Then the second possibility is to increase the effectiveness of the iodine. And as you know, when you decrease the energy of the X-ray beam, you have an increase in iodine detection. And with spectral CT, with CT that have a very strong power and strong tubes, it's possible to decrease the kilovolts by increasing also the flux of milliampere seconds. And in that case, we will increase the effectiveness of iodine, and we will also decrease the amount of irradiation to the patient. So there is a double win here by decreasing the KV with more modern CT scanners. Lastly, maybe we can decrease the dose and recover the lost contrast effect with appropriate algorithms which can enhance the contrast, and there is some artificial intelligence tools that can help for that in order to decrease the dose we can inject to the patient. So this is, I would say, some wise radiology where we should always be careful to what we inject to the patient and try to always inject the minimal dose, but the minimal diagnostic dose, of course, we should not inject a dose that is not diagnostically effective, because otherwise it would be a waste of resources. And one very effective way to decrease the leftovers in the vials is to use the multi-patient and big volumes and to switch to multi-patient injection. So I know that in Europe it's something that is being done in many countries for many years. In France, my country, this was not allowed due to regulation that were not allowing the big volumes on the market, because in the French blood contaminated history like 20 years ago, the national agency was very cautious about this multi-patient thing because there were risks of bacterial and blood contamination of the patients. But it will start 1st of March, so in 2 days we will have a change in the regulation in France. So we will be able to move to multi-patient. I think we are pretty happy with that. Multi-patient is possible, is safe if you use the appropriate injectors and devices with a set for the patient and a set for the day. And if you change and if you handled correctly your injector, there is no risks to use to do multi-patient. And when doing multi-patient, you have big volumes, so you can have a 500 cc vial for many patients, so you decrease the waste, and it makes you more obliged to calculate the right dose for the right patients. So at the end, if you do a multi-patient, there is less end vials at the end, so there is less to recycle. For gadolinium, it's the same, and this paper just was released yesterday or 2 days ago. It's colleagues from the Contrast Media Safety Committee, and they review strategies to reduce the contamination of water environment by gadolinium-based agents. And you see here there is different solution, higher relaxivity agents, optimized acquisition, optimized post-processing, do alternative sequences without contrast, and so on, and multi-injection systems. So it's about the same tricks as for iodine. And in this paper, published in Radiology very recently too, concerning climate change and what radiology should do in order to be more green, you see that in number 7, it's reduce waste of contrast and single plastic, and you can have a 93% reduction in plastic waste by switching to multi-dose contrast system. Not only you save plastic, but you save the remnants of the contrast media in the left vial. And so for that, there is company initiatives to recycle iodine contrast media. I interrogated recently all the contrast media company. At Bracco, it's called Reviver. At GE, there is no name for that, but they launched a big European project on recycling omnipaque. For Bayer, it's called Recontrast, and for Gerber, there is no name, but there is also a pilot study. What is the idea? The idea is to give containers to the radiology departments, and so there's these containers delivered to the radiology departments, and the technician at the end of the examination or at the end of the vial, when you do multi-patients, through the remnants into these vials, and at the end, when it's full, you call your contrast media company who takes the full vial. It goes back to a factory, and in the factory, it's treated to create iodine sodium residues. So it's treated, and the company is doing iodine salts, which are then sold to the I would say non-pharma market of iodine, because we use iodine in the industry not only for contrast media, but for polarizing films, disinfectants, catalysts, pharmaceuticals. To table salt, we add iodine in the salt for the table salt, and others. So there is a need for iodine for different purposes, and this iodine coming from the recycling of contrast media is going to be reused, especially in table salt, as I heard. Concerning gadolinium, there is less initiative. Bayer launched an initiative called Recontrast with gadolinium. It's the same thing. You send containers and you fill it with remnants of vials. In France, there is a big project called Megador, Medical Gadolinium Recycling, which has been launched by our colleague Professor Ben Salem in Brest. You see, in Brittany, close to the sea, because he did a study showing that the mussels in Brest were contaminated with gadolinium. So it raised awareness to him that it was no more possible to throw away all this gadolinium from the hospital waste and sewage system into the sea, and something had to be done. So they started this project that, especially knowing that 15% of the gadolinium produced is wasted. And the goals of this project is to inform and raise awareness in the radiological community, to create a recycling process and to collect unused DBCAs. So you will receive at your own facility, department, such a container. And then when it's full, you send it back to Brest. And in Brest, they fill this huge tank, with several cubic meter of gadolinium. And then it will be handled by Gerbe in order to recycle gadolinium. This initiative has been endorsed by the French Society of Radiology under the Green Radiology Initiative they launched 2 years ago. So what can we do with recycled gadolinium? Of course, like for iodine, it's no more going to pharma. It's not possible to reuse it as a contrast media, but gadolinium can be used in several other industry fields, like lamps, X-ray scintillators, shields for nuclear plants, luminophore for color TV. So there is many industrial use of gadolinium, not only radiology. And so, is this effective? Because it's a nice thing, it's a lot of energy to have this container cell sent to the radiology department, to have the technician fill every day with remnants of the vials. And at the end, maybe it takes 1 month to fill out the container and to send it back by post to the company. So Bayer told me that in 1 year pilot, they were able to gather 56 liters of Ultravist and 36 liters of Gadovist for 1 year. But when you compare this number to the amount of iodinated contrast media that is injected in the world, I told you 12 million liters, 12 cubic meter. It's nothing. It's about one. It's very little. So maybe it's not. It's a nice thing to do, I would say, for the environment, but it might not be the main issue to do in order to reduce the pollution in the water. So what should we do? The factories, of course, should handle their wastes during the production of the contrast media, but I think they are doing that, and since the waste are created inside the factory, it's easy for them, to handle these wastes and to put them into another cycle for non-pharmaceutical products. In the radiology department, these unused vials, as I told you, is a nice initiative, but at the end, it's only a few percent or even a few thousands of what is used every day. And to me, and the main pillar we should think of is to decrease the waste from the patient, because for the moment the patient goes home, he goes to his home toilets or in the public toilets, and all the gadolinium or all the iodine is going to be in the sewing system, and to be, as I told you in the first slides, and to join again the cycle of water and surface water and drinking water through the plants. So I think the main issue is to try to decrease the urinary excretion of the patient, and there is some initiative, but it's more complicated. It needs, for example, for the first 3 hours after the patient has been injected, to stay in the radiology department and to go pee in the special toilets, where there will be a special sewage system in order to avoid this toilets to go to the global sewage system. There is another possibility is to give plastic bags to the patients, and when they go home, they can pee in the plastic bags, and these plastic bags can be put into the trash, and it's going to be burned. And when the iodine inside is burned, it does not create pollution. So it's a good solution too, to send these bags to the patients. But it's a complete rethinking of the cycle of the contrast media we use, and we need to think about and to implement in the future. So for the moment, these initiatives by the companies to use unused vials, but to my mind, it's not sufficient. We should continue with better handling of urinary excretion of the contrast media company. This is the main point to decrease the pollution. Maybe we will need specific plans and maintain the patient in-house. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. It's very good to see that the room is almost full, so I think this is a subject that's gaining more attention, and I think it's also an important subject. I have no disclosures for this topic. I guess if we look at our personal lives, we all make an effort to make our CO2 footprint a bit lower, right? We buy electric cars and we fly less. I myself took the train to Vienna rather than flying to Vienna. Try to eat less meat, etc., etc. But I guess the biggest impact that we have on the environment is actually in our personal, in our work environment, right? It's easy to say who's responsible. In personal life, we are responsible, but that's an issue at the workplace. Who actually is responsible for a more sustainable management? Now, definitely as an IR, my impact in the workplace on the environment is much, much bigger than the impact I have in a personal life. There have been some publications on the sustainability in IR, and one estimated that there's an average of 240 kilograms of CO2 equivalent generated per procedure, and that's roughly 100 liters of gasoline per procedure. Now, in another study in the US, they measured the CO2 emission over 5 consecutive weekdays in an academic IR center, and that added up to 24,000 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. That will be more than 1 million kilograms per year, and equivalent to roughly the energy use of 150 households for 1 year, or driving roughly 5 million kilometers with a gasoline car. So we can state that, yes, the impact that we have as interventional radiologists on the environment is huge. We create a lot of waste, and I think we can and we should do better. Now, we conducted a survey amongst IR staff and published that last year. And what it showed that there is a very high awareness among IR staff. More than 80% of the respondents indicated that they were aware of their negative environmental impact, but only roughly 1 in 10 indicated that they were quantifying their impact. Only 30% had undertaken action in their hospital. Only in 1 out of 4 centers, a green team had been installed, And a lot of respondents indicated that yes, ideas were there, but often they were not effectuated. And there was limited collaboration with other departments in the hospital. So let's zoom in on the different types of waste that we produce in interventional radiology. One comes from the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. Then we have the consumption of power due to the machines that we use. Of course, these machines also need to be manufactured, so that's also something that we need to take into account. And we use a lot of disposables. Similar to diagnostic radiology, we use contrast media and data storage, but I won't go into detail on those. Now, Toby has already showed a nice slide on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That actually is the highest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the IR department, and half of the emissions are generated during out-of-office hours. So yes, I agree, shutting off the machine is a very important thing. What is different from CT rooms or MR rooms is that we work under sterile conditions in IR. So that also means that the room air needs to be refreshed with huge volumes each hour. Now, simple things can be done, of course. Install occupancy sensors, low energy lighting, energy efficient air conditioning systems, and importantly, has already been mentioned multiple times, turning off the systems during after hours. And that could actually reduce the energy consumption by half. And we should also implement an HVAC setback. So also those air exchanges could be reduced, and you could reduce it from 100 to 30% when the system is not in use, and also allow temperature and humidity settings to fluctuate when the system is not being used, in particular at night. And that has also been mentioned by Tobias in the previous talk. We do not only reduce the impact that we have on the environment, but we also save a lot of money for the hospital. Now, Tobias also showed that there's a lot of idle time in IR in angiography rooms. We've installed power meters in our hospitals, and this is just a graph of measurements that we took during several days. And you see these spikes of energy consumption, and in between there's a lot of idle time. Now, it would be pretty easy to build algorithms, and we're doing that with our industrial partners, for the system to recognize when a procedure is coming to an end or has ended. And then you have this pop-up on your screen indicating, okay, is it safe to turn off the machine now? I think if you leave it to people to think about shutting down the system, they probably will leave it on all day. Yes, we must bust the myth with regards to shutting down the system. In IR, there is no safety issue. I sometimes have colleagues that say, well, if an emergency case comes in, it might be dangerous not having the machine on, but this is basically rubbish. It only takes about 2 or 3 minutes to turn the system on, and I've never seen an emergency case coming in and being on the table within 2 or 3 minutes. Now, if you build in all these algorithms that would turn the system down automatically at night and in between the different procedures, it has been estimated that you could actually reduce the energy consumption by 80%, and that's a huge percentage, right? Now, things that we also need to consider is to buy refurbished systems. These are 4 systems that we acquired last year, and actually half of them are refurbished systems, and you really can't tell a difference between the refurbished systems and the brand new system. They operate perfectly fine. So refurbished systems really are an option. And again, it saves a lot of money. So you see happy faces, even the head of the department is smiling. So then disposables, that is the second highest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the IR department. I'm often surprised that materials that we use are extensively and excessively packed. If you look at the overall weight of an IR product, more than half of it consists of waste. And often we have set components in the procedure pack that are never being used. So things we can improve upon, well, purchase products from manufacturers who have strict green policies and are committed to recycling and reusing their products. And we should make sustainability part of all our tenders, I would say. We should engage with suppliers to redesign procedure packs according to local preference, and they are more than willing to do so. We could remove items that are not usually not used regularly. And currently, you still have these paper use manuals, which we never read because we know our products very well, right? So let's get rid of those and start using online internet links or QR codes for manuals of use. I think a lot of materials are often discarded, end up in the waste bin without being used, and that's because they are sometimes opened without double checking, and we open up the wrong materials. So always double check materials before opening packaging, and there should be incentives to reduce soon to expire materials. These are photos from our own hospitals. You see these orange labels, and these indicate that these are materials that are soon to be expired. So the technician should take these off the shelf first. And there's also something with hand hygiene. In a lot of hospitals, we still use hand and soap. Well, this is not better than using alcohol. You could do with 50 milliliters of alcohol rub, and that is similar to the use of 20 liters of water. So that's all, just use alcohol rather than water to clean hands. We could reuse products, and this seems difficult maybe in IR, but there are ways of doing this. Disposable clothing is definitely has a greater environmental impact than reusable clothing. So if we start using reusable gowns, we could reduce the consumption of energy, reduce greenhouse gases and the use of water. And there are other ways. We have to be creative, right? One of the things that we looked into are inflation devices. And these are bulky plastic devices that we use for balloon inflation in percutaneous transluminal angioplasty, for example. And they are used by cardiologists, IRs, vascular surgeons. They are single-use items that are then discarded as clinical waste and incinerated. There are more than 10 million of those used throughout the world each year. And well, there is a financial incentive for this practice. Global sales revenue are estimated to be over 600 million and projected to surpass 1 billion. But it doesn't really make sense that we have this practice, right? Why can't we come up with a sustainable inflation device, something that can be reused? This is design that we developed with the Technical University in Delft. A reusable inflation device that consists of different parts that you can disassemble and then sterilize. And actually the idea resonates. We already won 2 prizes and now have a grant to further develop this, and hopefully at some stage it will become a product that's commercially available. Now then, recycling products is also an important topic. At least 20% of all medical waste is plastic, and most of those plastics are potentially recyclable. So in our departments, we should have an easy way of separating waste. So these are pictures from our hospital. I think in almost every room we have these possibilities to separate wastes, separating hard plastic from soft plastic, from Tampax, etc., etc. Recycling blue wraps is also an important thing. Blue wraps are used a lot, in particular in OT, but also in interventional radiology. And we have liaised with different companies to recycle those and make chairs out of it. And actually, McDonald's is now one of the companies that's buying off chairs from this company. So maybe you end up sitting on a blue chair with McDonald's, although I'm not sure if that's the most sustainable company. Unfortunately, a lot of waste ends up in the wrong bin. And it's important to separate waste because of the environmental impact that the waste has, but also there's a cost issue to it. The disposable costs of general waste are roughly 100 euros per ton, but clinical waste is over 800 euros per ton. So if you throw it in the wrong waste bin, you also waste a lot of money. So we should make it easy for our employees, right? Nudging is something that really helps. So clear markings or images of what should go in what waste bin. And in the IR room, we should have the general waste bin next to the table when they're preparing for a case. This is when most of the items are being unpacked and the waste ends up in the waste bin. Make sure that it goes into the general waste bin and not in the clinical waste bin. This is the waste bin that should be used only for contaminated products, and this is incinerated after the procedure. So I think there are plenty of opportunities to make our practices more sustainable. It often is an issue, who is responsible in the hospital, but I think we are all responsible, so should take responsibility. It helps to install a green team in your hospital. Quantifying what you are doing is very important, I guess, and Tobias showed how much input that provides. So start measuring your energy consumption. Switching off or going to sleep mode is really important. I showed different ways of handling disposable, reduce, reuse, and recycle are the most important parts of that. And I think we all have to learn from each other and adopt practices that seem to work. Okay, thank you for your attention.
I like the last slide, or one of the last slides from my previous lecture, in which there was the quote about what Einstein said about human stupidity, that it's almost infinite, or that it's infinite. I think he has a good point. If we look at the global heating, I mean, you know that already, but just to make it clear one more time, we are experiencing immense amounts of heating right now, and the curve is even going up, and we are causing it ourselves. So we are emitting high amounts of carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is the main cause of global heating right now. And even we in the European Union, although we try to be as careful with that as possible, at least we begin to be as careful as that as possible, we have a high footprint as compared to other regions of the world. And in the following, I'm going to speak about the footprint of AI. And to give you a frame of reference, I thought about, well, let's take the average carbon footprint of a citizen in the EU, and let's take that as a reference so that you can get a better feeling of how much carbon AI models actually produce. So the average carbon footprint of an EU citizen per year is around 7 tons of CO2 per year. To give you another reference, if you take a flight from Munich to New York and back in economy class, that's around 2 tons of CO2. And since there are a lot of radiologists here, and we have already heard about that in the preceding lectures, if you have an MRI scanner and you use that for a full year, that's around 60 tons of CO2 per year, quite a lot actually, and a lot of CO2 that is being produced by us. But of course, we need these scans, and they do a lot of benefit. It is thinkable, and we all hope that AI will also do a lot of benefit for our patients, right? So we think that these models can help us diagnose in the medical setting, and that all began back then when we found out these models can be very good at differentiating images. Is it a dog or a mob? Or is this a dog or a cookie? That worked really well, and sometimes even better than us humans. And so we soon transferred that to radiological images and images from the nuclear medicine department or images from our pathology friends. And that also works very well. That's something that we do not want to give up. So the question is, how much carbon is produced by training these models, by using these models, and by rolling them out to the clinics ultimately in some years maybe. So maybe you can make an estimate. A typical model, typical training of, highly depends on the case, of course. If you train X-rays, it's a bit simpler than if you train three-dimensional volumes in CT. But typically, within an order of magnitude, that'll be around 100 hours of GPU usage. GPU stands for graphical processor unit. Those are the graphics card that you use. They're highly used in AI modeling because they are exactly constructed to work for that. How does it relate to the carbon footprint of an EU citizen per year? It's actually surprisingly small fraction. It's only like 1 day of carbon footprint. So every one of us, on average, emits as much carbon as training one of these models would have emitted. More importantly, once we have trained these models, of course, they're going to be applied to medicine and all other use cases. More importantly, therefore, it is also to look at the inference costs. By that, I mean, when you apply the model to a medical examination, for example, how much does it cost to really let the model run? Typically, that's around 10 seconds of GPU time. I spoke with the CEO of DeepSea this morning. He said, yeah, that's about right. It's within an order of magnitude. And if you then crunch the numbers on that, that's really a tiny fraction of our everyday life, right? So within less than 3 seconds, we emit more carbon dioxide on average, if you include, of course, all the industrial carbon dioxide emissions, than if you were to run a radiograph through such a model. Now, in terms of the mass of CO2 that is emitted, that's 0.5 grams of CO2. And if we have a look at how much CO2, because we have seen those MRI machines produce quite a lot of CO2. If we compare that to the typical examination that you perform, so how much CO2 is emitted on average by one MRI examination, because then ultimately you would have this MRI examination, and then you would put or use an AI model to throw it upon that MRI examination, or multiple MRI models. So how much does it really add to that? Is it a significant fraction, or is it just a tiny fraction? And maybe you can make an estimate in your head, or you can judge how much that will be. When we actually then calculate it down, so say we have this scanner, it's around 60 tons of CO2 per year. You might have around 4,000 MRI examinations plus or minus per year on that scanner. That's roughly equivalent to 15 kilograms of CO2 per examination. Now that means that this fraction that you use, or the amount of carbon dioxide emitted for the use of the AI model, is really tiny in comparison to that. And the use of MRI additionally on top of the MRI examination, the use of AI on top of the MRI examination is really insignificant in that this use case. So it's more or less the same to the MRI alone. The title of the lecture was problem or solution, so it can even be part of the solution. If you use AI models, for example, to make the acquisition faster, and there are, I think by all vendors now, there are AI models which do this. And even if you reduce the time that you need and make it a bit more efficient just by 10 to 20%, you already more than make up for the use of those AI models that you use for reconstruction and for like analysis of the images as well. So it can be part of the solution. Of course, now I've been talking about image analysis models, but the big elephant in the room is large language models. Those have become very popular within the recent 2 years, I'd say, and it has been in the mainstream media that they produce a lot of CO2 emissions as well. So the question is, are these much different from the models that I've shown you so far? So and the big candidate there is, of course, GPT-4, which is ChatGPT. Unfortunately, the company owning ChatGPT is very secretive about that. They don't tell you how they trained it. They just give you rough estimates on what architecture they use so that you can't build it on your own. I understand that. It's unfortunate because if we go back a bit in time, they haven't always been like that. and they haven't, ironically, their name is OpenAI, right? They lived up to the expectations back in ancient times in AI history, so to speak, because like 3 years ago in AI is already a lot of development that can happen in between. So GPT-3 was one of the last models by OpenAI, for which they published a rather extensive paper in which they described in detail what they did, how they trained the model, and how much GPU power was used to train the model. So from that, you can make an estimate on how much carbon is actually emitted in the training process. Famously, the training process in which you take in all of the content, like all of the textual content that you extract from the internet or from books, and then let the model run on it on thousands of GPUs, is going to be very expensive. So if you calculate how much this is in terms of our unit of MRI scanners, that's just, I would like to say, just 10 MRI years. I'm sure people in this room are responsible for much worse, you could say, but it's not really worse. It's like much more carbon emissions in terms of MRI years. So it's not that much, considering that it's a very powerful model that is being used by a lot of people worldwide. But it's GPT-3. It's much simpler and hadn't been on the public radar back then because it wasn't as amazing as GPT-4 is right now. By the way, this is roughly equivalent to 260 round-trip flights from Munich or Europe to the US. So basically, it's one jumbo jet going back and forth, not that much. But let's try to analyze GPT-4 then again. As I said, they are very secretive, unfortunately, but there have been some indications on what they use. So you can't keep everything secret once you have thousands of employees. So there was some speculation that details have been leaked. Well, there was someone who leaked those details. The speculation was, is it real or not? The kind of owner, one of the director of OpenAI said, no, sorry, it's not real. I mean, what else could he say? But I think, again, it will be roughly correct within an order of magnitude if we take these numbers. So those numbers are that you probably need around 25,000 GPUs, and those are state-of-the-art GPUs, or they had been at that time, A100 GPUs. And training time was around 100 days. So you can calculate, okay, these are known numbers from NVIDIA, right? So each and every GPU unit consumes around 400 watts of power. That amounts to a power of 10,000 kilowatts if you calculate it. And let that run for around 100 days. So 100 days times 24 hours. That's 24 gigawatt hours of energy. Now, how much is that really if we again compare it to our measurement units that we hope to give us a better frame of reference? It's letting one MRI machine run for 120 years or having 3,000 people going back and forth over the ocean. I mean, that's basically probably one RSNA Congress. So for that, you get training of GPT-4, which is, I think, not that much actually. But again, the question is important, what about inference? Because it has been trained and now millions of people are using it worldwide. So how much CO2 is emitted by that? There are some papers who estimate that, and you can make some indirect assumptions. For example, this was a paper back in 2021 when Facebook, company which is also developing or investing a lot in AI, estimated that their data centers use around 10% of the time, GPU time, for experimentation, which means before you train a model, you need to try out several things. Does it work? How do you want to have the architecture to be? Then actually just 20% of the time for training and 70% of the time for inference. Again, I would argue that is not that much. That's still within one order of magnitude. So you have thousands of airplanes flowing around the world every day. So in comparison to that, that's not that much again. We can go a bit more accurate with these estimations now that the use of models, because that was back in 2021, the use of OpenAI's ChatGPT has risen quite dramatically. So here they made an estimate. I think that paper is just a few months old, so we can probably rely on those numbers, even though it's steadily increasing. They made an estimate that the cost of inference, so cost of using the model for the users using the models, is between 1 to 23 million kilowatt hours of energy. Another paper made a similar calculation, and they came within 4 million kilowatt hours of energy. There's a lot of unknowns, of course, but again, roughly, that's probably within one order of magnitude, and you can't say more because they are so secretive about that. So remembering the numbers from before, for training, we had 24 gigawatt hours of energy, 3,000 people flying over the ocean and back. Now for inference, we have a bit less maybe, but let's say also 24 gigawatt hours of energy per month. That is now, the numbers are now a bit accumulating, I would say. But it's probably less than at least what I thought before I did all the calculations and did a bit of research into that, because from the popular media, you could have gotten the impression that this is going to be the #1 CO2 emitter in the future. I'm not convinced of that when I go through the numbers. We are much worse or much better, unfortunately, in producing carbon in other instances and in our everyday life and our work life. So what some preliminary conclusions? The carbon footprint of AI is not negligible, as we have seen, but as I argued, it's small compared to other activities. And it's that we have also already seen twice in these lectures, the preceding lectures, in which it was shown that AI can, for example, estimate the power consumption of scanners just from the log files, or that it can use it to reduce contrast medium. I really like that. And here I've shown you that it can also be used to reduce scanner time. So you have a potential for higher efficiency, and actually that can lead to net savings. And even if you don't take these into account, you still have the possibility to lower the footprint of the AI models themselves by using smaller models, by condensing the models down, using smaller weights or a smaller number of weights, by using more efficient data centers, by not every hospital deploying their own GPU machine, but using centralized data centers which can employ the economy of scale, and by using green energy. And that's, of course, trivial. Now, within the last 2 minutes, I want to a bit have an outlook on the future, because I think we will see a lot of additional uses of AI in the future, and the field is just really developing right now, exploding, and we will see a lot of application cases that we now can't really think of at the moment. And just to give you a glimpse of what is possible, we have seen in the preceding slides as well that AI can generate a lot of nice pictures already, but now, just a few weeks old, these same guys from OpenAI, which are unfortunately secretive, can also generate videos now. And since it's approaching the time of coffee, I thought I'd show you a video of a pirate battle between two pirate ships sailing inside a cup of coffee. And what I found even more impressive was this instance where they made a very elaborate description of a close-up of a gray-haired man pondering the history of the universe and having a subtle closed-mouth smile. And I'll show you the video in a minute. I think it's really impressive because it captures the human emotions. But just to wrap up, the caption, the description could have been a gray-haired man pondering the contents of a paper in the Journal of European Radiology, because that's actually what we wrote about this very topic, the ecological footprint of medical AI, and he shows a subtle smile if you look carefully. And yeah, with that, I'd like to thank you very much.
Well, it's great that we can now open the discussion and questions to the audience. And we do have some on the Slido, but also please come to the microphone if you would like to ask questions to our speakers, so that people online can also hear your questions. The first one is about switching off, and it says turning modalities or PCs off. What about software updates? If you can go to the microphone, because otherwise people won't hear. Thanks.
Well, that's, I think for PET-CT we showed it, but also for PCs, you can actually schedule those. So there's actually software that can monitor all your hospital PCs, and you schedule their updates and so forth. You're not aligned in this way. So you can actually control how your devices are start up and shut down, and then also plan the update. So that shouldn't be a problem.
I mean, I just want to also just say we've done this at Imperial College Healthcare, and it had a massive impact on the cost of electricity in the 3 hospitals, something about £500,000 in 1 year. And that was just for the PCs. And it was automated switch off and switch on. And then they could automate updates in the middle of the night. They could control that through ICT. And it was even the ICT department couldn't believe how much money. Of course, it was after all the energy costs went up, but it was very, very substantial, and that wasn't including clinical in-use computers and the PACS, and so the PACS is our next step. But I mean, this is incredible, and it used to be that we were all told keep the computers on because there's going to be an update, and so it's difficult to just say to people, please switch off. In fact, that's one of my questions we need to come to, because people worry about switching off. It's not that they're trying to do the wrong thing. And so having these automated systems that are, they can feel comfortable about somebody switching it off when they know it can be switched off, and I'm happy with that. And they can switch it on for the updates. So, I mean, yeah. Can I just see, just in the room, does anybody here have like a regular automated switch off system for their PACS or computers in their hospital? I just want to see what's happening across the community. Okay, so there's one there, okay, in Leiden. I mean, who would do it if you could? Who would be nervous about putting a system like that in? Nobody would be nervous, so that's quite good. Yeah, okay, please.
This is actually, I can ask questions for you too. I'm Cassie Thiel. I was wondering, when you had a lot of great energy data, were you metering all of your equipment, or how did you, or were you using the pinging software?
Oh, like in previous versions of this talk, because of the time, we actually have a very nice system in place. We measure all of our devices. Our hospital has, I think they decided a long time ago, the larger consumers should be measured. So we can actually measure everything from PET-CT, angios, the radiotherapy units and all that kind of stuff. It's actually much more work to actually analyze this stuff, but we have this information in place. Yeah.
And then the pinging code that you mentioned, does that just tells you if a computer's on or off? It doesn't tell you anything about it?
It's super basic. It just says, hello, I'm there, or I'm not there. But it's enough to know systems are on or off.
And I have a different question for Olivier. So I was wondering about, for iodine and gadolinium, how much is excreted by the patient? Like, does any of it get metabolized, or?
Thank you, Olivier.
Now it's a normal renal function, the way 100%, maybe 99% or over 1 day. Maybe 1 little percent is staying longer in the body, but...
And there's nothing like stored in the thyroid or anything like that?
Sorry?
Nothing stored in the thyroid or anything like that. I was just talking with another person who had to leave, and he was wondering about that. If there's anything.
I don't get
No, is it being stored in the thyroid gland?
Thyroid
So
gland.
gadolinium, we have deposition in the brain. Iodine, the question is it deposited and stored anywhere?
No, it's only impurities of the vials who are going, iodine salts that are going to the thyroid gland. Otherwise, it does not go.
Thank you.
But gadolinium does get stored in the body in different places, yes? But it's only a tiny fraction, I assume.
Yeah, it's a very tiny fraction. That's why I said maybe less than 1%.
Yeah.
Will go to the bones or go to a third sector where they will be trapped for a longer time, like, for example, in the CSF. But 99% is excreted by the kidney in
I want to ask a question to Olivier. Is yours for Olivier as well?
Follow-up question.
Okay, perfect. So while he's up, we got to grab him. If anybody has contrast questions, now's your moment.
If you look at iodine, if you look at a CT scan, a normal body scan, by the time the patient is scanned, usually you have some excretion in the urinary bladder already. So by the time the patient is up off the table and dressed, probably about 30% is in the bladder already. Why doesn't anyone try to get that first void and then get the iodine out of the urine?
Yes, that's a good idea.
It's a perfect question. I think there's a project, you might be aware of it. The Green Water Project is being run in Milan. I think they got a big grant to evaluate this type of procedure. And I think we're going to get them back next year to see how it's all going.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anything about that project, Olivier, maybe not. No. The Green Water Project.
I've read it, not precisely exactly,
No.
but
Yeah, so they're going to come hopefully next year and tell us, because I think it just started recently. Is anybody in the room working on the Green Water Project in Milan? No. So I think this is a really excellent idea, because maybe at least say I don't know, how much would you capture in the first hour or so, or even as you say, even the first 15 minutes, you might capture a reasonable amount.
Yeah.
No?
if the half-life is 2 hours, in 1 hour you might get 50% already of the contrast media, so it's a good idea.
No, they burn it. I have the same chief of department, and he doesn't believe that's the way to go. So they collect it in bags to prevent it getting into the water, but then they burn it. And I don't think that's the way to go, because it's a good product, and I think we can recycle it.
I mean, I had two questions around the contrast, which is what's happening with developments with our chemistry colleagues and sewerage. Is there any chemical reaction or something in the sewerage system that is being developed? That's one question. The other question I had was, are our industry colleagues and innovators working on other types of contrast media that can be degraded in a safe way or something like that? I mean, I'm just like blue sky thinking. I don't know what's on the horizon.
No. I would say that the contrast media in itself, when it's in the environment, is not dangerous, because it's not toxic to the environment. The problem when it goes to the sewage system, it goes to the plants that recycle, that clean the water, and then they add some cleaning products, and it creates iodine IBPMs. I gave a talk last year about it. And this IBPM are toxic for the environment. So this is a process of cleaning the water in the plants that creates the problem. And that's why when you burn it, it's different, because you create it's not toxic to burn iodine products. You don't create toxic elements.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience, please? Yes, please come to the microphone. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank you for this excellent and interesting session. And I don't want to diminish the role of contrast media, but I think it has to be seen in a larger context. We have a huge problem of urine excretion of, let's say, anti-hypertensive medicaments and psychopharmaca. Yeah. So I think radiologic contrast media are only a rather small part of the problem, and the important question is really how to get rid of all these substances we are excreting every day over our countries into the sewage systems.
Yes, you're right, but in terms of quantity, we inject, when you do a CT examination, you inject 35 grams of iodine in the body. When you take antibiotics, you take 500 milligrams. So the amount that's why, the amount you can recover in the Rhine River is larger, because the amount we inject in patients is much larger than medications, than normal drugs.
Okay, I had a question about why is it that we're all not switching off? And we say that we are the problem, and we're part of the solution. But how can we change this behavior? Because everybody knows, pretty well everybody knows. We saw in that survey, people know that we need to become greener. They know that imaging is a problem, but how can we shift the dial so that people are turning off, that people aren't opening kit that they don't need, that people are recycling properly? What do we need to do? I mean, what are the solutions to some of these like human factors? Any thoughts on that? Or in the audience? what do we need to do? Because we talk about it, we discuss it, we try to educate, but we need things to change now.
I think there may be several solutions. I think one thing
Closer
is
to
that,
the microphone a little bit.
oh, sorry. One thing is that I think in healthcare, we are trained to be always on, because we need to be always be available. There could be always like treatment, patient care being happening. And so focus is not on what we're doing. And when we shift the focus, we realize there's a lot of things that are still on, are wasted in various ways. So we can create awareness there that would be helpful. But again, we're humans, we raise awareness, and 3 months later, we have to raise
People
awareness
forget.
again.
Yeah.
So we need, I'm looking at the vendors, and I see some representatives here. We need to have solutions. Our monitors, they switch off after a minute of inactivity. So our devices and other systems should help us as well. And maybe with dashboards, information, transparency, and focus from societies, we can actually, we put this into awareness.
Please.
Yeah, I was hoping to add to that. I was thinking about this as well. I think for a lot of hospitals, right, it's a very bureaucratic system. And if you're an individual working there, it's one of those places where it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission to do things. And I think in this case, the risks are a little bit too high for forgiveness, right? If you break a CT scanner, no one's going to forgive you for that. So I think there's a lot of concern over the risks for the individual to engage in these actions when the penalties could be so high if there's a mistake with it, right? So no one wants to be responsible for that, what could happen, right? Even if it's a false kind of myth that things will break if you turn them off. No one wants to be that person who might be the one blamed for something going wrong. And so that's where I think having manufacturers take on the responsibility makes it a little bit easier for the individuals, certainly, in that it's not a personal risk to their careers. But also then maybe there's structures that hospitals can employ so that there is more protection for employees trying to engage in those activities.
So it seemed that there's like a theme around automation. So what we did at Imperial, automating the switch off of the PCs, automation for switching down machinery, and that people almost can't be trusted to do it. We're not trusted, but they're nervous to do it. There's fear or whatever of doing the wrong thing. And automation seems to be something that, and we won't be able to do that as working radiologists. It will come on the industry side and with software developments, I think. I mean, so I think this would be great if industry can take this on, and I know that they're working on it. I had one other thing that I thought was quite interesting about the manuals, the paper manuals. You were saying, why do we have paper manuals in everything that we open up? Is that something we need to bring to the regulators? Because it may be that the regulators say you have to give the manual inside the packaging. Oh, can you? Yeah, please. Yeah, both of you can. Yeah, please.
I'm actually not sure what the regulations are on that. It could be that, yes, this is something that is a requirement for vendors to do, but I think that is pretty outdated, right?
But so this is perhaps something that the big societies can actually take to, on policy side on the EU, like ECR can bring that to the EU regulator, and I'm sure there's, I think I saw some American bigwigs in the room, hopefully, that could take it in the States. If we can change that if that's a regulatory requirement, that we should look at that for sure.
Absolutely.
Because every single packet has more paper and what have you, and ink and all of that. So I think I'm going to find out about that afterwards. I'm going to try and find out.
Well, I think packaging in general, it seems that the materials are being packed with more plastic throughout the years. You often have materials that are double or triple packed, and I really don't think that is necessary for every product. We have to work with still our products, but it really is excessive how these products are packed. So it's something to look into as well.
Yeah, okay, something for industry to think about. Yes, please.
So some resources for you as you're looking into this. Your colleagues in ophthalmology have actually been working on this issue of paper instructions for use. And they have a website called iSustain, EYE Sustain, .org, where they've launched a few petitions and things, but they actually have a working group for sustainability that has partnerships with vendors and suppliers. And this is one of their big pushes because, of course, for cataract surgery, you have an implant, and the booklet of directions is far bigger than anything else that comes with that procedure. And so they're trying to get rid of that paper instructions for use and switch to electronic instructions for use, which is possible. But for a lot of vendors, what happens, because they're selling around the world, not every country allows you to have paper or electronic instructions for use. So the ophthalmologists have just recently identified which countries have either unclear laws or they're actually flat out banning electronic instructions for use. And they're working with their societies in those countries or those regions to try to shift regulation there. Because from the supplier perspective, they'd have to have two different workflows or two different factory lines, one for the electronic instructions for use and one for the paper. And so it's not worth it to them to do that, even though they would very much love to switch to electronic and saves them a whole bunch of money and whatever else as well. So there's some resources available, and maybe there's some good partnerships.
That's so interesting. I think we can take that up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hi, I have a question for the last speaker. Are you concerned about the developments in LLM because they are going bigger and bigger? It's like they are trying to build huge LLMs, and they will take more and more energy, as they say. All the world, so all the data we have in the world is less than we put into a 4-year-old child. So if you want to achieve something like GAI or even human-able AI, we would need much, much larger LLMs. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's to a certain extent true, but also we haven't yet explored the full algorithm or the full model architectures. So it might just be that we come upon a different architecture that works much better. So that was also one of the developments that fueled the transition of these LLMs from being, well, poor sentence constructors towards really kind of reasoning like a human. There was the transformer architecture. So it might well be that in, I don't know, a few years or so, we have another architecture which enables those LLMs to learn from fewer data like a human child does, maybe.
Absolutely true, but right now the technique is to use transformer networks and make them bigger. I mean, GPT-3 is basically, so GPT 3.5, which is ChatGPT, is bigger than GPT-3, and GPT-2 is also the same. It's always transformer, and it just got bigger.
Exactly. I mean, there are lots of papers who show once you go bigger, you get better. The scaling laws. And I mean, as a CEO of OpenAI or Microsoft, I would do probably the same. That's the so far proven path of making a model superior to the other competitors. So that is one of the ways, at least, or the main road they pursue at the moment. I can understand that. And if I'm concerned about that, I'm more concerned about the social implications of having these large language models, which can then be used to manipulate humans. That's much more of a concern than probably the ecological aspects at the moment, at least for me.
We have 1 minute. There's a quick question on here, and then we have one question in the room. I just want to say that one online speaker said, or delegate said, are there ways that you could bring your calculation of the AI footprint to our society to run against the rumors of high CO2 production using large language AI models? So will you be publishing, or is it published? It was published.
Sorry, it's about
your calculations for.
Yeah, part of them are published in this paper. I did some additional calculations to be up to date with the GPT-4 thing in this presentation. But yeah, I'll try to get another paper then published.
Go on, do it. Yeah. And last question.
It's thank you. It's something more than a comment. I strongly support anything making more efficient. But when you look at the last 150 years, every time when mankind makes something more efficient, it doesn't lead to less energy consumption. It leads to consumption of more of the same product. So, and thinking on the MRI, we end up with more MRIs in a year on the same detector, but it won't consume less energy. So, as I said, suggest and support making more efficiency, but don't expect using less energy. And that's the same with ChatGPT.
No, I completely agree with this comment. And right now, it's not the energy costs or the ecological costs that the people who are using these AI models are looking at, but the capital costs. And that will lead, making those more efficient, making those models cheaper, will lead to more companies actually using them. Yeah.
Yes.
So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank you very, very much to our excellent speakers and for your interaction in the questions and answers. Thank you.